Republicans still attempting to derail Obamacare and turn it into a political football, it remains unclear whether he's strong enough to get legislation passed. Jeffrey Feldman is the editor-in-chief of the influential political blog Frame Shop.
The legacy of this Obamacare policy is uncertain at this stage. Frankly, it will be decades before the dust settles and before we know whether or not Obamacare resulted in an across-the-board lowering of expenses. Meanwhile, it's going to be used as a political football for months to come. Certainly in the next two elections, it's going to be a political football.
This year, Obamacare turned from words to actions, and October 1st was the first day people could sign up. At the core of Obamacare lies an attempt to provide all Americans with health care. When George W. Bush left office, 40% did not have health insurance. And the inability to cover medication costs is the number one reason behind personal bankruptcy in the U.S. However, skeptics say the ACA will negatively influence the U.S. economy, and Obamacare's cost is estimated at up total $1.36 trillion by 2023. John Davidson is healthcare policy analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Opposed to the Affordable Care Act for many reasons, but primarily because of the unintended consequences the act is going to have on the U.S. economy, on employers and employees alike, by driving up the cost of health insurance and making health insurance more unaffordable for the middle class. We're also opposed to it for the way it tries to expand government-funded healthcare programs like Medicaid, which are ineffective, wasteful, and provide a very poor quality of care for the people on them.
As the healthcare.gov website was launched, it was crippled by a computer program glitch, giving its opponents, especially Republicans, room to maneuver. They now say it foreshadows deeper failings. The president, however, called to stop worrying about the website and start talking about Obamacare's benefits.
From the Moscow headquarters, Radio DR, the voice of Russia. Radio DR News.
A suicide bomber set off a blast in the entrance hall of a Russian police station on Sunday, investigators said, killing at least 16. Authorities said the attacker detonated a threat-to-serve pram in front of a metal detector just inside the main entrance of the station in Volgograd. The Federal Investigators Committee and other officials initially said a female suicide bomber had blown herself up after a police officer started to approach her near the metal detector because she looked suspicious. Authorities had identified her as a resident of Dagestan, the widow of two militants who were both killed by Russian security forces. Investigative Committee spokesman Vladimir Martin later said a man could have set off the blast. Interfax cited law enforcement sources as saying authorities believe the attacker was a man who brought a bomb into the station with a rucksack. The U.S. State Department on Sunday condemned the attack by a suicide bomber at the main railway station in the southern Russian city of Volgograd. The United States condemned the attack in the strongest terms, a statement issued by State Department spokesman Jen Psaki. We send our sincere condolences to families of the victims and stand in solidarity with the Russian people against terrorism of any kind, said the statement. At least 18 people were killed in attacks across Iraq on Sunday, including a military general in a bombing in the northern city of Mosul, police and medical sources said. The suicide bomber killed at least 8 soldiers, including a brigadier general and 3 other officers, when he blew himself up by their convoy in the eastern part of Mosul. In another incident, at least 4 soldiers were killed and 10 wounded when gunmen attacked a military barracks in the town of Garma, 30 kilometers northwest of Baghdad. Al-Qaeda-linked militants have stepped up their attacks in recent months against Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's Shia-led government and anyone seen as supporting it. Egypt's interim president said on Sunday the government was committed to holding parliamentary and presidential elections within 6 months of approval of the new constitution, to be voted on next month. The timetable means Egypt would have an elected government by next summer to replace that installed by the army after it ousted elected Islamist President Mohamed Morsi in July. A bomb exploded outside an Egyptian army building north of Cairo on Sunday, wounding 4 soldiers, the army said, in the second bomb attack on security forces in the Nile Delta in less than a week. The bomb partly destroyed the back wall of the military intelligence building in the village of Anshas, 100 kilometers north of the capital. France will supply weapons to the Lebanese army if it is asked to do so, French President François Hollande said on Sunday during a visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met King Abdullah. Riyadh had earlier pledged $3 billion in aid to the Lebanese army to strengthen its capabilities at a time when the country faces renewed instability because of the war in Syria. Formula One legend Michael Schumacher is in critical condition and in a coma with a cranial trauma after a skiing accident in France, doctors in Grenoble have announced. His manager Sabine Cam had earlier confirmed the 44-year-old sustained head injuries during a skiing accident. Cam said he was wearing a helmet and not alone at the time of the incident. The Chaparastic volcano in eastern El Salvador belched a column of hot ash high into the air on Sunday, frightening nearby residents and prompting authorities to order evacuations in the area. There were no immediate reports of injuries in the San Miguel region where the volcano is located and that is known for its coffee plantations. The volcano is about 140 kilometers to the east of the capital.
Quick look at the weather now. Well, a little bit nippy in the Russian capital, Moscow, about -1 to -2 degrees Celsius. Going over to Volgograd, it's -2 degrees Celsius, and then London between 4 and 5 degrees. Once again, a very good evening from the Russian capital, Moscow. This is Radio VR. I'm Estelle Winters. Please do stay with us.
Radio VR. This is the voice of Russia.
Well, our main story, Volgograd investigators have found out that Oksana Aslanova, a native of the Republic of Dagestan, could have been the female suicide bomber responsible for the attack at the railway station in Volgograd earlier on today. According to RIA Novosti, citing a source in Dagestan's law enforcement agencies, the blast claims the lives of 14 people and has injured dozens. The energy of the explosive device equals that of 10 kilos of TNT, and the handmade bomb was filled with pieces of scrap metal. The explosion hits the city just 2 months after another female suicide bomber attacked a bus in Volgograd. This killed 6 people and injured 28. Well, earlier on this year, Islamist militants promised a wave of attacks in southern Russia. This would be, they said, to prevent the authorities from hosting the Winter Olympics due to take place in Sochi. This resort city is located just 690 kilometers away from Volgograd, while the authorities in Volgograd are providing, of course, all necessary help to the families of those who were killed in the blast and those who were injured. Let's now turn to Maria Ivanchenko. She's a reporter for Volgograd-based Akhtuba TV company.
I'm currently staying at hospital number 25, where 37 people injured in the blast are being treated now. They were provided with all necessary medical assistance. The governor of the Volgograd region, Sergei Bajanov, has arrived at the hospital too. The families of the dead will be paid $30,000 in compensation. A plane of the Emergency Situations Ministry is expected to arrive soon to help in treating the injured.
Investigators are currently trying to identify victims and the female suicide bomber. Still, they're not absolutely sure whether it is the person that I just mentioned, according to the Russian Investigative Committee spokesperson Vladimir Markin.
The chairman of the Russian Investigative Committee will soon arrive at the scene in order to better coordinate the investigation into this crime. At the moment, the relevant proofs are on the way to identify victims of the blast and a female suicide bomber.
Yes, the translation there of what Vladimir Markin said, he's spokesperson for the Russian Investigative Committee. Now, president of the International Counterterrorism Training Association, he's Joseph Linder, believes that having enough security experts who would be monitoring public transportation facilities is indeed a crucial thing in preventing suicide bombings.
The first thing to do is to train a big number of qualified security experts who all have long got used to undergoing numerous checks at airports all around the globe. Security checks at the rail stations are different. Making these places safer required huge investment capital. Meanwhile, all efforts which are being made in this direction are obviously insufficient.
Well, moving on now to another story. A U.S. federal judge has ruled that the NSA's mass surveillance of American citizens' telephone records is both legal and useful. The ruling by New York District Judge William Pauley came a week after another court said the opposite. Now, Pauley described this snooping as a counter-punch against Al-Qaeda, while a federal judge from Washington ruled that the surveillance was indiscriminate and an arbitrary invasion. This reflects the ongoing political battles in the United States. Philippe Langlois, a Paris-based telecom security expert, spoke earlier on with Radio VR.
Basically, it shows that there's a war currently going on in the NSA, in the USA politics, within the big problem and the big war is being acknowledged globally as they have a security problem, you would say. But more importantly, NSA is actually failing its job. They're tasked with surveillance of the global communication and finding who are terrorists, yet the judges could not have any proof given to them that the mass surveillance program was used to capture terrorists or to foil imminent attacks. And basically, I think this is even a problem within the USA, even a problem within NSA. Because if at NSA, basically, Snowden could have expressed himself, as he said, he tried to see if he could change the system from within, and he could not. So that's why he went for the whistleblower route. And I think this internal problem and heterogeneity of position is going to be something that lasts for a long time within NSA, and where this problem is not going to fade away.
In his 53-page ruling, Judge Pauley concluded that the right to be free from searches and seizures is fundamental, but not absolute. Philippe Langlois criticized this conclusion that he said refers to the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
It's within the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that says that basically you cannot be searched arbitrarily, and basically it's a freedom from search and seizure for your house, your papers. The Judge Pauley forgets about the arbitrary part, because when you do massive surveillance, it's arbitrary. You cannot do massive surveillance and at the same time select only the terrorists. It's basically either you get everything or you get nothing, and that's the principle itself of mass surveillance. Now the problem is that in the Fourth Amendment, your house and your papers and your person were only local in your house. Now your computer is your house, and your computer is having all your letter, your private journal, your photos. And it is now located not only in your computer, but in all your family's computer, which are often distributed around the country or the world. Hence, the notion of privacy applies globally, and its protection should and needs also to be global. But here, when you read actually Judge Pauley ruling about saying that mass surveillance is legal, it's a very particular interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, which doesn't hold really water.
Philippe Langlois, a Paris-based telecom security expert there, commenting on the U.S. federal judge ruling that the NSA's mass surveillance of the phone network is legal. The global chemical weapons watchdog has called on Syria to intensify its efforts to help ship out its most dangerous chemical weapons. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons said that the logistic elements were in place to pick up the weapons.
OPCW Chief Ahmed Uzumcu had stated that Russia, the United States, and other countries directly involved in the removal had agreed on how to escort the cargo vessels from Syria after a two-day meeting in Moscow. Security assets involved in the operation include Russian armored vehicles, US satellites, and Chinese surveillance cameras to protect the hazardous cargo. A Norwegian frigate is ready to go to the Syrian port of Latakia to collect the weapons for destruction. The chemical watchdog said it was up to Syria to mitigate the risks involved in transporting the stockpile to the port. Syria agreed to abandon its chemical arsenal to avert a possible international military intervention after a sarin North gas attack in August 2013.
Under the agreement, which was brokered by the United States and Russia, the complete elimination of sales of all chemical weapons material and equipment must be completed by the first half of next year. Now, the most critical chemicals include about 20 tons of the blister agent sulfur mustard. China is easing its birth planning policy, and now it's allowed for only one of the parents to be an only child, the couple to have a second child. This is the first major easing of the 3-decades-old restriction, first announced by the ruling Communist Party's leadership. The decision has now been officially sanctioned by the Standing Committee of China's top legislature and also the National People's Congress, according to the Chinese official news agency.
Implemented around 1980, China's one-child policy allowed couples to have a second child only if neither parent had siblings, or if the first child was a girl born into a rural family. The policy is believed to have prevented some 400 million births. It has been praised as a means of reducing China's rapidly growing population. However, critics insist that the policy is a violation of human rights and results in forced abortions and heavy fines for the Chinese families. Some critics also say the law hurts China's elderly, who typically rely on their children for support, and even constrains economic growth as the working-age population begins to decline. Since the 1990s, the birth rate in the country has gone down, with Chinese women giving birth to an average of 1.4 to 1.6 children. Demographers and policymakers have estimated that the new easing would result in 1 to 2 million extra births per year in the first few years, on top of the 16 million babies born annually in China. China is the world's most populous country, with 1.35 billion people. The easing of the one-child policy expected to go into effect in some regions of China in the first quarter of next year. Moving on now, well, this year is coming to a close, and it's time to take stock. From a media point of view, it's been a rather rough year. The greatest reporting coup of the year, the revelation is based on the former NSA contractor Snowden, fell to Glenn Greenwald, a long-time media outsider. That's as veteran institutions in the United States have been coming under fire for erroneous breaking news reports, for example, during the break of the Boston Marathon bombing. Well, Radio BR's Justin Mitchell was joined live by Robert McChesney, a professor of communications at the University of Illinois, and also co-author of the book Dollarocracy, to discuss the crisis in modern journalism.
Well, there's a lot of things we've already talked about, like Bezos' connection with the CIA, or Amazon's connection with the CIA, and sort of the power this gives wealthy, extraordinarily wealthy individuals and corporations over leading news media. But I think really the biggest story of all, the one that's talked about the very least, which is that Bezos was able to purchase the Post really for chump change. He reached into a spare change drawer and pulled out, $250 million in cash to buy the Post, which had he tried to buy it, for example, 10 or 15 years ago, probably would have had to spend more in the range of 3 or 4 to as high as $6 billion to buy. So basically he got it at a fire sale price. And no one was surprised by that who follows news media, who follows the business of commercial journalism, because the business of commercial journalism is dying rapidly. It's in free fall collapse.
What do they need to know that they're not knowing? I mean, newsrooms are being decimated, so where does that leave us?
Well, first of all, they should know the extent of it, because while it's obvious, when you look at it closely, and journalists know that there's very few reporters left covering anything, what it means is that most of the news people are getting from what the news media is either unedited, unreported official statements by people in power, or else it's just press releases and public relations stuff, and powerful just are able to purchase what they want to have as the news. It goes in an unadulterated fashion. All the research shows that, news now that we consider news, well over half of it, in some cases as high as 80 or 90% of it, is basically stuff that has nothing to do with journalism. It's just press releases or uncritically reporting people in power, official sources, what they say. And, I don't think many Americans are aware of this because it's not reported, it's not talked about. And to most Americans, they think they're in this information blizzard, that they're overwhelmed by news and information. They don't understand that most of it's just nonsense propaganda or regurgitating some talking point that a PR agency has thrown out there.
Do you have any ideas for how journalism can dig itself out of this existential crisis?
Oh, absolutely. We just have to look at all the other major democracies in the world, from Japan and Asia to virtually every Western and Northern European country. They have massive spending for public and community media that's non-commercial. And what we find that all the research shows, those nations, which are all democracies, the nations that spend the most per capita on public and community media, supporting radio, TV, and now internet, have more diverse and competitive media systems than the United States has. They have much higher voter turnout, and by The Economist magazine, they're much freer and more democratic societies. The research shows that the more that is spent by democracies to provide nonprofit, non-commercial journalism, the better the commercial journalism gets too. The less censorship there is, and the more adversarial these media are toward the government in power. Quite the contrary of the fiction that's proposed in the United States whenever the issue arises.
100 million people worldwide listen to the Voice of Russia from a Russian perspective. The Voice of Russia broadcasts in 160 countries and 38 languages. Now you can join them. News, views, and discussions, current topics, real people. We welcome your feedback and suggestions at world@ruvr.org.
Radio VR News.
It is possible that two people, a man and a woman, were involved in the terrorist attack at the railway station in Volgograd, a source in the law enforcement bodies of the North Caucasus Federal District told Interfax. The policemen who survived the attack said they had seen a woman they found suspicious after one of them made an attempt to approach her. The blast occurred. At the same time, local video camera captured a man in the epicenter of the explosion. Besides, a man's finger with a joint pin was found at the scene. 16 people, including a suicide bomber, were killed and 50 injured in the blast that rocked the Volgograd railway station on Sunday. President Putin has given instructions to leaders of the Russian power ministries to find out the reasons for the terrorist attack, find its organizers, and bring them to justice. Egypt's interim president said on Sunday the government is committed to holding parliamentary and presidential elections within 6 months of approval of the new constitution, to be voted on next month. The timetable means Egypt would have an elected government by next summer to replace that installed by the army after it ousted elected Islamist President Mohamed Morsi in July. France will supply weapons to the Lebanese army if it is asked to do so, French President François Hollande said on Sunday during a visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met with King Abdullah. Riyadh had earlier pledged $3 billion in aid to the Lebanese army to strengthen its capabilities at a time when the country faces violent instability because of the war in Syria. An earthquake hit areas of southern Italy on Sunday, sending many residents out into the streets. The quake, which was measured by the U.S. Geological Survey at 5.2 magnitude, was felt in densely populated cities such as Naples, Avellino, and Caserta. There were no immediate reports of injuries or serious damage. And that's the news in brief.
The final results, books and authors of 2013 with Mitri Haritano. In October 2013, Donna Tartt, an American writer, published her third novel, The Goldfinch. It took her 11 years to write, and we readers tend to expect a lot from a book that takes so long to be completed, especially if a distinguished critic described its author's first novel thusly. Imagine the plot of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment crossed with the story of Euripides' Bacchae, set against the backdrop of Gratis Analysis Rules of Attraction and told in the elegant, ruminative voice of Evelyn Wadsworth has revisited. This novel, The Secret History, was a strange, frightening, and very successful story of a group of classic students and their professor. Tartt's second novel, The Little Friend, was about Mississippi of the 1970s and a dead boy. The Goldfinch deals with terrorists, trauma, and art.
But sometimes unexpectedly, grief pounded over me waves that left me gasping. And when the waves washed back, I found myself looking out over a brackish wreck, which was illuminated in light so lucid, so heartsick and empty, that I could hardly remember that the world had ever been anything but dead.
Donna Tartt seems to be one of those writers that critics love, and as long as she keeps up the good work, she's gonna be fine. She also seems to be a natural for writing. Barry Hanna, a writer who was Tartt's teacher when she studied in the University of Mississippi, called her a rare genius and a literary star. 2 decades after Donna Tartt soared to literary stardom with her debut, The Secret History, the reclusive author is set to release her third novel this autumn. This is how The Goldfinch was announced in The Guardian. The New York Times called it one of the 10 best books of 2013, and according to the Daily News, Stephen King was also impressed by it.
Donna Tartt is an amazingly good writer. She's dense, she's elusive, she's a gorgeous storyteller. But 3 books in 30 years, that makes me want to go to that person and grab her by the shoulders and look into her face and say, do you realize how little time you have in the scheme of things?
True, Tartt doesn't care much about her production rate or publicity or advertising, which more often than not is a sign of a true writer. In a 2002 interview, she said, part of the problem with success is that it seduces people into overproduction. People you'd meet and talk to, and journalists would say, oh, what are you going to do to top this one? If your name's not out there in 2 years, people will forget all about you. I mean, geez, what are they talking about? William Styron said when he was about my age that he realized he had about 5 books in him, and that was okay. I think I have about the same number, 5.
News, views, and culture. Brought to you by the Voice of Russia. From Moscow with love, this is Vasily and Natalie on the Voice of Russia. Online, on digital, AM, FM, and what may be our final time on shortwave? You really don't know that. Hello? Hello, welcome to the show. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everyone. This is our last show this year, and who knows, probably the last show on the VOR.
Stop it right there. Hold it. You don't know that, okay? And why so gloomy? You remind me of your fellow citizens who have this old habit of making things sound worse than they really are. Now, what are you talking about?
What am I talking about? As if you don't know. Our listeners know. Here, Adita Pritika Subrahmanyan posted this in our From Moscow with Love fan page on Facebook. Even she knows what's going on. Hello, Vasily and Natasha, she writes. I'm from India and just heard your cheerful voices for the first time on shortwave, especially my cheerful voice. Yours is a wonderful show. Enjoyed that piece about the UFOs on today's show. Sad, though, since we have only a couple of shows that we would get to hear on shortwave.
Oh, Andita, you're so sweet. Thank you for listening. Shortwave listening is a great hobby, okay? Meanwhile, my friend Jonathan Marks sent me a message via our Facebook fan page. He writes, hi there. So, Voice of Russia suddenly disappears as a radio station. There is nothing on the VOR website to really explain what happened. So what's the story? Okay, well, let's get this out of the way, shall we? All right. Folks, there's been a lot of talk on the internet, all over the place, about the end of shortwave broadcasts from the Voice of Russia. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I haven't discussed it with anyone around here. Am I worried like some of you are? No. Am I losing sleep over it? No. Am I posting mindless crap about this and the voice of Russia all over the internet? No. Do I care? Not really. Do I have a right? Yes, I'd like to think so. Look, so many stations have already left the shortwave bands for the same reasons. Are we as shortwave listeners happy? No. But can we put all our emotions aside and deal with reality? You might be asking why there hasn't been anything on the air or on the website about this. Good question. I would probably guess it's because don't make such a big deal out of it. Honest. The fact is, most of the comrades here at the office will continue working just as they have always did. The programs will be carried online, on satellite, and on the many local stations around the world, in cities like Washington, D.C., New York, Miami, Chicago. There are DAB broadcasts in the UK and other European cities. The list grows all the time. Yes, shortwave listeners are disappointed. I can understand this. But the hobby doesn't end there. Huh? Does it? Get a grip.
All right, but what about the merging of the station with RIA or RIA News Agency?
Well, hold on a second, Barbie. At the risk of sounding like the devil's advocate, let me say I'm not an employee of this radio station. For as long as I've been a shortwave listener, including the very early years as a kid in Maryland and the years I worked at Radio Moscow World Service, I've always felt there was so much room left for improvement at Radio Moscow. Now, if this merger with the other Russian news organizations leads to something good, I can only welcome this. It's been long overdue.
But aren't you sad at all? This is bad news for shortwave listeners around the world.
Honey, the only thing I'm sad about is the bad reviews the new Texan PL 880 radio has been getting around the world. Hey, I just received my radio, and I'm praying for a firmware update. I shouldn't have ordered so early. So stupid of me.
Come on, Buzz.
All right. What I am sad about is the yet unconfirmed information dealing with having to move out of this historic building into a new facility several miles away. Because, I don't know, maybe it's because we worked here a long time, for a very long time, you know, you and I and the rest of us, because you and I were fortunate to have worked with so many great people here, whether we wanted or not, you know. Our lives are connected with this building at Pyatnitskaya Street number 25.
I suppose we feel like the BBC staff when they were forced to leave Bush House.
I'm not sure what the people here are feeling.
It looks like most people are very worried about their future.
And what's that got to do with leaving the building?
Okay, then at the risk of sounding very trivial, I'll say, how's time flying?
Natasha.
Just yesterday I heard Abba's song Happy New Year, and I remembered where I had first heard it. It was here at Radio Moscow. It was the end of December. We had a big party in the then newsroom, and for that party we had recorded a very funny show made up of all sorts of radio bloopers. It was directed by our recently deceased colleague, Eugene Kutenko. Everybody took part. It was great fun, and we played out with ABBA's Happy New Year. If you remember, the song goes, who knows what we'll find, what is waiting down the line at the end of 89.
Right, yeah.
At that moment, 1989 was such distant future that I thought it would never come. But it did come, and much quicker than I had thought. And then 1999 came, and 2009.
Yeah, right. The song is great, and I do love it. And I also remember quite a few New Year and Christmas parties here at Radio Moscow. There was one in the early 80s at the North American Service office. It got quite rowdy. At one point, the door opened and Alexander Barabeychik walked in. Now, the guy was a famous correspondent at Radio Moscow. He was in his 50s, I believe, back then at least. He was mean-looking, walking around the corridors with a Cuban cigar. Some people were very afraid of him.
And I was.
Yeah, he was notorious for speaking out his mind in the most uncensored fashion. I guess he had some anger issues.
He was a bully.
Maybe it was just an image. I really don't know. Anyway, when he walked into the room, the place went quiet, It was like an earthquake coming, He looked around, took a puff of his cigar, and said, "You might want to tone it down a bit within the next 15 minutes, as the security guards are making their rounds right now. I don't want you kids to get caught with all that booze in the office." Natasha, if there ever was a Christmas miracle at Radio Moscow, this was it.
Mr. Barbashik was notorious for his complete neglect of decent pronunciation. He despised all attempts to speak English correctly. He spoke with a heavy Russian accent and was proud of it. I once very timidly tried to explain to him that people in the West would not listen to his sort of English and would simply turn off the radio, to which he said, "Never mind. Let them get used to our Russian English."
Right.
I believe the old-timers remember how he interviewed English-speaking people. He would rudely push his way through any crowd. He was really big and bulky, would stick the mic into the person's face and snap, "Speak, please."
That's right. Well, what about you, Natasha? Are there any other Radio Moscow New Year's parties you remember? Speak, please.
Well, the one that I just mentioned, then another one a year later when everyone was so plastered that sound engineers would come, grab this or that announcer and convoy him or her to the mic to record a news bulletin or a commentary. Then I remember that wonderful Christmas party when we dropped the turkey on the kitchen floor.
Where was this?
It was at another announcer's apartment.
Okay, and what happened there? I don't remember this.
You weren't there.
Oh, that's why I don't remember. I wasn't invited. Okay.
Well, I don't know why you weren't there, but you weren't there. Maybe it was before your time. And then we picked it up, and we ate it, washing it down with vodka, and it was delicious. But the kitchen was a mess, and it took us a very long time to wash the grease off the floor. Speaking of New Year, one of the old Russian traditions is throwing out old things on New Year's Eve and buying new ones.
Yeah, throw out the old junk only to replace it with some new junk. I love throwing out stuff. I do it all the time.
And we had a major New Year Eve cleaning at home. Surprisingly, it was triggered by the sad discovery of 2 rightful boots we brought for Kathy from the States.
The boot drama continues. What did you do to the notorious boots? Now, did you throw them out?
No. We bought a normal pair of boots for the kid, and then I remembered that we had oodles of boots up in the attic.
You remembered it after you bought the boots.
Exactly. You know me.
Yeah.
So we made Johnny get everything out of the attic, bagfuls of junk, suitcases filled with suitcases like nest dolls,
Right.
rolls of wallpaper and bathroom tiles left over from last summer repairs, and finally some 10 pairs of boots and shoes of all sizes and shapes, and among them a brand new pair of boots for Kathy. Exactly the same as we had just bought her. Apparently we bought them last spring and had forgotten all about them, so now Kathy has 2 identical pairs of boots.
Plus 2 right foot boots her mother bought her in America. Yeah?
Yeah.
The Boot Saga. Will there be a second season?
Oh, yes, you'd be surprised. But the boot saga is not over yet. I'll keep you informed. In the meantime, we threw out such a lot of junk, and so much is still waiting to be thrown out. I have to start sorting out our books. We have an enormous library, and many books, they are third-rate Soviet literature kept for sentimental reasons.
Exactly.
You know, some were bought by my grandfather, some were given to my mother by my grandmother, and so on and so forth. Nobody reads these books anymore, but somehow it's very difficult to part with them.
Yeah, I know how you feel. Remember what I had to go through during the renovation at my house like 2 years ago? And ladies and gentlemen, I was so happy that Natasha took many of my old childhood books, which we brought with us from D.C. back in 1975. All right, so I reckon apart from winter cleaning, you are free now. Is school over? Did you finally leave your poor students alone?
I've got almost the same question from Stephen Graves, our American listener and friend, who is also worried about my students. He writes,
Are your students on winter break, or do they find themselves loaded with homework that will last for months? Well, rest assured, folks, that my students are vacationing happily and celebrating New Year and Christmas, traveling with their parents, skiing, skating, munching chocolate, drinking cola, sleeping till late in the afternoon, whatnot. All this debauchery will continue till January 8th. Stephen also wonders if I have to attend any certification classes during the holiday period to maintain or upgrade my teaching credentials.
Yes.
No way, Stephen.
No.
Nobody here attends any classes during the holiday period. The entire country is having fun. Drinking, eating, celebrating, traveling. As a rule, teachers have to attend some sort of certification classes and upgrade their teaching skills once every 5 years, but not during the break. Unfortunately, the process involves a lot of unnecessary paperwork, and the teaching is not up to the mark at all. It is mostly empty talk about the problems of teaching, which has nothing to do with the English language. But without attending these courses, you will never get a certificate, and you will have to work for peanuts.
Right.
And that's exactly what I'm doing at school. I told my principal once and for all that I don't need any pay raise as long as they leave me alone. I hate paperwork, and I have no time for attending any stupid classes. Besides, Stephen, how can you upgrade the teaching skills, which are perfect?
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Right. Of course, Natasha. Tell me, what are you planning on doing during the New Year's break? You do some traveling, perhaps, or what?
Oh, well, we always see the New Year in at the Dacha. It's Mom's birthday, the 31st of December, and all our family gathers to wish her a happy birthday and to see the New Year in together. It means a lot of food, wine, noise, fireworks, and a big bag of presents from Santa Claus, or Father Frost, as we call him here. You'd be surprised, but Kathy is not the only one to anticipate the presents. The eldest kids love them, too. We'll stay in the country till Russian Christmas on the 7th of January, and then hubby and I are planning to sneak away to Athens for a few days, if it works out. That's my Christmas present to my husband. He always gives me wonderful presents, and this time I decided to surprise him.
Oh, that sounds nice. Good luck. I, on the other hand, have no definite plans, as always. Probably spend a quiet New Year's Eve. Quiet. New Year's Eve.
Can't imagine.
Yeah, some close friends. Although there might be a trip to a friend's country dacha. You never know. New Year's Eve celebrations are wonderful in the country villages.
They are.
As everyone pours out into the snow, drinking, singing, lighting fireworks, getting their fingers blown off.
If we do have any snow, party, friends.
Yeah, we're going to take a break right now. We'll talk more about holidays and all sorts of stuff right after the news and brief on The Voice of Russia.
Radio VR News.
It is possible that two people, a man and a woman, were involved in the terrorist attack at the railway station in Volgograd. A source in the law enforcement bodies of the North Caucasus Federal District told Interfax. The policemen who survived the attack said they had seen a woman they found suspicious. After one of them made an attempt to approach her, the blast occurred. At the same time, local video camera captured a man in the epicenter of the explosion. Besides, a man's finger with a joint pin was found at the scene. 16 people, including a suicide bomber, were killed and 50 injured in the blast that rocked the Volgograd railway station on Sunday. President Putin has given instructions to leaders of the Russian power ministries to find out the reasons for the terrorist attack, start its organizers, and bring them to justice. Egypt's interim president said on Sunday the government is committed to holding parliamentary and presidential elections within 6 months of approval of the new constitution, to be voted on next month. The timetable means Egypt would have an elected government by next summer to replace that installed by the army after it ousted elected Islamist President Mohamed Morsi in July. France will supply weapons to the Lebanese army if it is asked to do so, French President François Hollande said on Sunday during a visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met with King Abdullah. Riyadh had earlier pledged $3 billion in aid to the Lebanese army to strengthen its capabilities at a time when the country faces renewed instability because of the war in Syria. An earthquake hit areas of southern Italy on Sunday, sending many residents out into the streets. The quake, which was measured by the U.S. Geological Survey at 5.2 magnitude, was felt in densely populated cities such as Naples, Avellino, and Caserta. There were no immediate reports of injuries or serious damage. And that's the news in brief.
All right, all the latest news there from the Voice of Russia. We are back. We are from Moscow with love, and we were talking about our plans for the New Year's holidays. It's a time here, first 10 days in January, when the whole country goes on vacation, and the consequences are felt for the rest of the year. As for yours truly, I'll probably spend a few days in the country, in the fresh air, relaxing, playing with my new radio. But, the atmosphere in Moscow, if we talk about the first 10 days, is very nice. First 10 days of January. It's very quiet during the holidays here in the nation's capital. The city is empty, as all the oligarchs are out of their, offshores. There's no traffic. The lighting is still there, the festive lighting. It's magical. I also want to take a late-night dinner cruise on the Moskva or the Moscow River aboard the Radisson fleet.
Well, that must be a fantastic experience now that Moscow is sparkling with thousands of lights.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about the traditions a bit more. Now, you mentioned the one about throwing all the old stuff away. The one I never understood, tradition speaking, was how and why you're supposed to say farewell, do svidaniya, to the old year by having a drink a few minutes before midnight.
Oh, but that's very simple. Mind you, it's an absolute must to say goodbye to the old year and thank it for all the good things it brought you. After that, you must have a shot of vodka or a glass of wine or any other alcoholic beverage, provided it is not champagne. Champagne is something to see the new year in.
Right. Well, I think it's just another excuse to drink.
Probably.
Drink a lot on New Year's night. Tell me, Natasha, what about all the mythical animals that are always associated with this holiday? It may sound dumb coming from me, and it probably is, but, I don't recall paying any attention to these things back in the U.S., but here, every year is assigned with an animal. Like this time. It's the year of the horse, is that correct?
Right, blue horse.
All right, blue horse. Are Russians really into that sort of thing?
I think they are, and I am very much into this. And I'm ready to tell you all that I know about the year of the blue horse and the Oriental and Occidental horoscopes and their influence on people. But let's do it next week, because it's a very interesting topic, and we simply have no time for it now.
Great, okay. One New Year's tradition here is to have Santa Claus or Father Frost and his lovely snow maiden visit kids from their parents' workplace.
That's right. I remember when presenter Alexander Schlichter from the British Service of Radio Moscow was Santa Claus, and you were Sister Joy. I was the snow maiden. They visited my eldest son when he was 3, 4, 5, and gave him wonderful presents.
Oh, hey, I was Santa once too, you know.
You?
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Wow.
Well, look, I had jeans on underneath the robe. And the
would.
Yeah, and the kids saw this and had a hard time believing I was the real deal.
Poor kids.
But I was okay, because another tradition came into play that day. You see, when Father Frost visits a family from work, the parents must pour Santa a shot of vodka. Natasha, by the time I was visiting the third or fourth family, I was already pretty hammered.
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
In the USSR, another New Year's tradition which I hated was watching television, remember? Till the wee hours of morning. There was nothing to watch but a lame Soviet-produced New Year's special called Blue Light, made up of ideologically safe jokes and unbearable Soviet singers. And later that night, it would be followed by an East German production featuring dancers from the Friedrichstadtpalast Can-Can troupe.
Yeah, I remember. They had long legs and lots of feathers on their heads and...
Exactly. Don't specify.
All right. This is from Moscow with Love on the Voice of Russia. By the way, this is edition number 150. Can you imagine What a coincidence that our last show of the year is also our show number 150.
Right. Amazing. Just hope it's not our last show ever.
Well, let's be realists, Natasha. For the time being, we're still on the air, and I guess in part because of all the response we're getting from listeners around the world.
True.
And this is not just talk, not just empty words. I know that international radio isn't what it used to be. It's a lot harder to be heard than it was in the 80s. But what I'm happy about is that we really have an audience out there. You know, every week we get new letters from folks that found us on the bands, on our site, through Facebook, sometimes even via Twitter. And this is the truth. At a time when numbers are dropping, we seem to be doing more or less okay. And I only have 2 words for all of you. Thank you.
We've made many new friends during our show over the past 3 years. We also had a couple of listeners visit us here in the studio.
Yes, that's right. And you, Natasha, met a listener during your recent trip to Washington, D.C.
Yes, I did. That's right. It was a lovely meeting. I will never forget. I also want to point out that this gentleman, his name is Wei Wang, is very well educated, and it was a great pleasure to talk to him and first and foremost, listen to him. I'm sure that without him, we would have never seen either the Capitol or the Library of Congress, and he also brought us 3 different varieties of delicious Chinese tea. Thank you, Wei. I hope to see you in Moscow.
Right. Natasha, you told me there were a couple of letters from our listeners who weren't sure about the future of the Voice of Russia and were so worried about you that they offered you to stay in their houses. Now, is that correct?
Yes, quite right, and I'm very grateful to them.
Yeah. William KB4IUJ writes, "It's too bad you two never made it to Chicago. New York City, so overrated. If you came to Chicago, you could have rode the city of New Orleans to Memphis and then on down to New Orleans. Guess for now they'll have to go on your bucket list. Yes. Well, you know something, William? I lived in Chicago for a short while back in 1991. I absolutely love the city, the people. As for New Orleans, yeah, I'll have to visit sometime later. Thanks for the letter. Nice to know you're listening. All the best."
Also, greetings to Jim Jordan. Thanks for stopping by our Facebook fan site.
Again, thanks for all your support, your comments, criticisms, suggestions. We really appreciate all the feedback and the friendship. As a way of saying thank you, we'll be doing something very special for you guys this month, hopefully this month, okay? Something special. Just stand by and follow our Twitter for special announcements. We'll also be posting information on our Facebook fan site, so make sure you follow us. Our Twitter is at FMWL Show, and our fan page is at Facebook.com/From Moscow with Love. And click on like if you want to receive all the updates.
Oh, yes, there'll be many new posts in the coming couple of weeks. I promised some new photos for my vacation, and
I'll be posting all the latest from my short New Year's holiday.
Don't forget to check out all the photo albums of galleries we have for you at the Facebook fan site. If you are a long-time listener from years ago, you might want to check out the pictures of Joe Adamov, Karl Yegorov, Nick Kornikov, Boris Belitsky, as well as photos of the big abandoned concert studio. These photos are so popular that they have recently been stolen from us and used on another website without any mention of us.
Yes, we know who's doing that. There are also photos of Marina Dimova, who used to present Folkbox. And do you remember Maria Dudina?
Of course I do.
She was host of Your Top Tune. All that is up on our Facebook fan site.
And if you're like me, indifferent to all the social networks, you can simply drop us an email. The address is moscowwithlove@gmail.com.
All right, there you go. It's time to run. Thanks for tuning into this program. A program about the life of 2 very different Muscovites.
Show number 150 and the final episode for 2013.
Yeah, we would like to thank you very much for all the support and kindness over the few years we've been on the air here at...
The VOR.
No.
VR?
Don't think so. Not anymore.
RNWS?
No, what's that?
RT.
What?
RT.
Huh?
Never mind. We'll see you next year.
Take care and...
До свидания!
Radio VR Chicago on 100.3 FM HD2.
Loose Cannon, top books from the bottom shelf with Mitchell Harrington. As we know now, J.D. Salinger has left us some work to be published between 2015 and 2020, including stories said to have something to do with Holden Caulfield, the magnificent and impossible kid of The Catcher in the Rye, the 1951 novel Salinger is best known for. I guess one might call it a teenage version of Sartre's Nausea, but in that case one should make it clear that he or she doesn't mean it in any bad way. It may seem that Holden is nothing like the narrator of Nausea, if only because he's one of those characters that Salinger labored hard to make too good for this world. On the other hand, Holden, a distressed teenager expelled from a private school in Pennsylvania and then suffering in an adult world of New York City, is an authentic existentialist. He's less of a thinker than Sartre's protagonist and much of a feeler, but existentialism is all about feeling to begin with. It's also about finding meanings where essentially there are none.
Anyway, I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of Ryandall. Thousands of little kids, and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going, I have to come out from somewhere and catch them. That's all I do all day. I'd just be the catcher in the Rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I'd really want to be.
In the 1960s and the 1970s, The Catcher in the Rye was the most censored book in the US, and it remains one of the most challenged books ever. In the 1960s and the 1970s, The Catcher in the Rye was the most censored book in the US, and it remains one of the most challenged books ever. The reasons for that lay outside literary considerations and yet again remind us that some people are disturbingly moral and want everything else, books, characters, other people, to be just like them. Nonetheless, The Catcher in the Rye is a classic, and the fact that it's probably being misread is of minor importance. Salinger confused lots of readers into thinking that his book was about being a teenager, while to call Holden a typical teenager would be a terrible insult. Unlike his stripes and his notorious pants, he's also if something good is to be associated with adolescence, it's him. It's hard not to agree with a New York Times critic who called The Catcher in the Rye an unusually brilliant novel, defined Holden's language as strange and wonderful, and wrote,
Holden is bewildered, lonely, ludicrous, and pitiless. His failings are not of his own making, but of a world that is out of joint. His minor delinquencies seem minor indeed when contrasted with adult delinquencies with which he is confronted. Mr. Salinger tells a story well, in this case under the special difficulties of casting it in the form of Holden's first-person narrative. This was a perilous undertaking, but one that has been successfully achieved.
Several attempts have been made to make a movie based upon The Catcher in the Rye. That one probably shouldn't count on ever seeing it. Salinger made it very clear that he didn't trust cinema enough to let it deal with his fiction. Yet, there are movies that show signs of contamination by the novel. In 2009, Salinger deprived America of the opportunity to read a novel about Holden as an old man, published in the UK under the pseudonym John David California. It's called 60 Years Later, Coming Through the Rye.
Radio VR,
Miami on
99.9 FM HD2.
The scandals, the sensations, the premieres, everything from crimes to movies that are worth remembering this year will be presented to you in Radio VR's new special project, 2013.
The cultural scandal of the year brought up old agreements between Russia and the US. The bone of contention is the so-called Schneerson Library. For decades, the Chabad-Lubavitch Hasidic movement in the state has been trying to regain possession of a collection of 12,000 books and religious documents assembled prior to World War II and kept in Russia since then. The founder, Yosef Schneerson, left the Soviet Union in the 1930s, taking part of the collection with him, while the remaining 4,000 volumes were nationalized. The Chabad movement accused Russia of appropriating the library, and last winter, a U.S. District of Columbia court ordered Russia to pay $50,000 per day in fines unless it returns the collection. Meanwhile, Russia claims that Schneerson had no heirs, which makes the library a national heritage. Dr. Veronika Irina Kogan, the dean of the Maimonides State Jewish Academy, says that almost 2 decades ago, Washington asked for 7 volumes from the library, and they're still in the U.S.
We found the books for an Austrian rabbi to work with them. Russia arranged an interlibrary exchange, but the Chabad Library, which is a legal entity registered with the UNESCO and the UN, declined the offer, while the Library of Congress accepted. The deal was sealed and envisaged a 2-year exchange.
Library issues aggravated Russian-US cultural exchanges as Russia limited its exhibition activities during the seizure of its art objects. So America so far will see no overs from the iconic St. Petersburg Hermitage and the Moscow Kremlin, or even Tretyakov Gallery. As a result, in February it was decided that a special department of the Russian State Library would be created in the Jewish Museum, and the Schneerson collection moved there. The ceremony of handing the first 500 books of the collection to the museum was attended by President Putin and Russia's chief rabbi, Beryl Lazar. Anyone will be able to browse through the ancient Hebrew volumes that were in the center of the property dispute for several decades. The Russian president also said that now the Schneerson library problem is closed.
You see, for many centuries, Russia was and continues to be a native land for Jewish people. Russia was initially formed as a multi-ethnic state, and representatives of the Jewish people have made their huge contribution to the development of our country, intellectual, military, and labor. The library is not only of interest, but also of great value for the Jewish people. It's transferred to the Jewish Museum and the Center of Tolerance. Any person, no matter where he lives, will be free to come and get acquainted with these rarities.
The Russian part of the Schneerson collection consists of 4,425 books, which are now being handed over to the Jewish Museum. Both parties to the conflict hope that this will put an end to the dispute, which sadly became the highlight of Russian-US cultural relations in 2013.
Radio VR. This is the voice of Russia.
State Department on Sunday condemned an attack by a force of Ukraine at the main railway station in the southern Russian city of Volgograd. The United States condemned the attack in the strongest terms, a statement issued by State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said. We send our sincere condolences to families of the victims and stand in solidarity with the Russian people against terrorism of any kind, said the statement. A suicide bomber set off a blast in the entrance hall of a Russian train station on Sunday, killing at least 16. Authorities said the attacker detonated a shrapnel-filled bomb with a metal detector just inside the main entrance in Volgograd. The Federal Investigative Committee and other officials initially said a female suicide bomber had blown herself up after a police officer started to approach her near the metal detector because she looked suspicious. Authorities identified her as a resident of Dagestan and widow of 2 militants who were both killed by Russian security forces. Investigative Committee spokesman Vladimir Markin later said a man could have set off the blast. At least 18 people were killed in attacks across Iraq on Sunday, including a military general and a bombing in the northern city of Mosul, police and medical sources said. A suicide bomber killed at least 8 soldiers, including a brigadier general and 3 other officers, when he blew himself up by a convoy in the eastern part of Mosul. France will supply weapons to the Lebanese army if it is asked to do so, French President François Hollande said on Sunday during the visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met King Abdullah. Riyadh has already placed $3 billion in aid to the Lebanese army to strengthen its capabilities at a time when the country faces renewed instability because of the war in Syria. Egypt's interim president said on Sunday the government was committed to holding parliamentary and presidential elections within 6 months of approval of the new constitution to be voted on next month. An Israeli ministerial committee on Sunday approved a bill calling for annexing a strip of land along the eastern West Bank, further raising tensions in already faltering Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations. 8 ministers voted in favor of annexing the Jordan Valley, 3 voted against, including Justice Minister Tzipi Livni, who chairs the committee. The vote came as Israel was to set free another 26 Palestinian prisoners early on Tuesday, and as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was due in the region later. Analysts said the proposed bill was unlikely to pass in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's full cabinet or in the Knesset, Israel's parliament, where it would have to be approved in 3 readings before becoming law. 2 peacekeepers, one from Senegal, one from Jordan, were killed in Sudan's Darfur region on Sunday when an unidentified armed group attacked their convoy, reported the United Nations. Retired Formula One legend Michael Schumacher underwent emergency surgery after being admitted in a coma with a cranial trauma after a ski accident in Meribel, a French hospital said on Sunday night. The hospital in Grenoble in the French Alps said the injuries required immediate neurosurgical treatment. Schumacher's manager confirmed the accident but did not go into the details. She confirmed Schumacher was wearing a helmet at the time of the accident. He was apparently skiing in the Alps with his son. And the Chalparas Peak volcano in eastern El Salvador has been belching columns of hot ash into the air on Sunday, frightening nearby residents.
Very quick look at the weather now. Well, it's a bit nippy in the Russian capital, Moscow, about -1 to -2 degrees Celsius. Going over to Volgograd, -2 degrees Celsius, and then London between 4 and 5 degrees. Once again, very good evening from the Russian capital, Moscow. This is Radio VR. I'm Estelle Winters. Please do stay with us.
Radio VR. This is the voice of Russia.
Well, our main story, Volgograd investigators have found out that Oksana Aslanova, a native of the Republic of Dagestan, could have been the female suicide bomber responsible for the attack at the railway station in Volgograd earlier on today. According to RIA Novosti, citing a source in Dagestan's law enforcement agencies, the blast claims the lives of 14 people and has injured dozens. The energy of the explosive device equals that of 10 kilos of TNT, and the handmade bomb was filled with pieces of scrap metal. The explosion hit the city just 2 months after another female suicide bomber attacked a bus in Volgograd. This killed 6 people and injured 28. Well, earlier on this year, Islamist militants promised a wave of attacks in the southern Russia. They said to prevent the authorities from hosting the Winter Olympics due to take place in Sochi. This resort city is located just 690 kilometers away from Volgograd. Well, the authorities in Volgograd are providing, of course, all necessary help to the families of those who were killed in the blast and those who were injured. Let's now turn to Maria Ivanchenko. She's a reporter for Volgograd-based Akhtuba TV company.
I'm currently staying at hospital number 25, where 37 people injured in the blast are being treated now. They were provided with all necessary medical assistance. The governor of the Volgograd region, Sergei Bazenov, has arrived at the hospital too. He said that the families of the dead will be paid $30,000 in compensation. A plane of the Emergency Situations Ministry is expected to arrive soon to help in treating the injured.
Investigators are currently trying to identify victims and the female suicide bomber. Still, they're not absolutely sure whether it is the person that I just mentioned, according to the Russian Investigative Committee spokesperson Vladimir Markin.
The chairman of the Russian investigative committee will soon arrive at the scene in order to better coordinate the investigation into this crime. At the moment, the relevant proofs are on the way to identify victims of the blast and a female suicide bomber.
Yes, the translation there of what Vladimir Martin said, he spokesperson for the Russian Investigative Committee. Now, president of the International Counterterrorism Training Association, he's Joseph Linder, believes that having enough security experts who would be monitoring public transportation facilities is indeed a crucial thing in preventing suicide bombings.
First thing to do is to train a bigger number of qualified security experts. We all have long got used to undergoing numerous checks at airports all around the globe, but security checks at the rail stations are different. Making these places safer requires huge investment capital. Meanwhile, all efforts which are being made in this direction are obviously insufficient.
Well, moving on now to another story. A U.S. federal judge has ruled that the NSA's mass surveillance of American citizens' telephone records is both legal and useful. The ruling by New York District Judge Julian Pauley came a week after another court said the opposite. Now, Pauley described the snooping as a counter-punch against Al-Qaeda, while a federal judge from Washington ruled that the surveillance was indiscriminate and an arbitrary invasion. This reflects the ongoing political Philippe Langlois, a Paris-based telecom security expert, spoke earlier on with Radio VR.
Basically, it shows that there's a war currently going on in the NSA, in the USA politics. We think the big problem and the big war is being acknowledged globally as the other security problem, you would say. But more importantly, NSA is actually failing its job. They are tasked with surveillance of the global communication and finding who are terrorists, yet the judges could not have any proof given to them that the mass surveillance program was used to capture terrorists or to foil imminent attacks. And basically, I think this is even a problem within the USA, even a problem within NSA. Basically, Snowden could have expressed himself, as he said. He tried to see if he could change the system from within, and he could not. So that's why he went for the whistleblower route. And I think this internal problem and heterogeneity of positions is going to be something that lasts for a long time within this problem is not going to fade away.
In his 53-page ruling, Judge Pauley concluded that the right to be free from searches and seizures is fundamental, but not absolute. Philippe Langlois criticized this conclusion that he said refers to the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
It's using the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that says that basically you cannot be searched and basically it's a freedom from search and seizure for your house, your papers. The Judge Pauley forgets about the arbitrary part, because when you do massive surveillance, it's arbitrary. You cannot do massive surveillance and at the same time select only the terrorists. It's basically either you get everything or you get nothing, and that's the principle itself of mass surveillance. Now the problem is that in the Fourth Amendment, your house and your papers and your person were only local in your house. Now your computer is your house, and your computer is having all your letter, your private journal, your photos. And it is now located not only in your computer, but in all your family's computer, which are often distributed around the country or the world. Hence, the notion of house here applies globally, and its protection should and needs also to be global. But here, when you read actually Judge Pauley ruling about saying that mass surveillance is legal, it's a very particular interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, which doesn't hold really water.
Philippe Langlois, a Paris-based telecom security expert there, commenting on the US federal judge ruling that the NSA's mass surveillance of the phone network is The global chemical weapons watchdog has called on Syria to intensify its efforts to help ship out its most dangerous chemical weapons. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons said that all logistic elements were in place to pick up the weapons.
OPCW Chief Ahmed Uzuncu had stated that Russia, the United States, and other countries directly involved in the removal had agreed on how to escort the cargo vessels from Syria after a two-day meeting in Moscow. Security assets involved in the operation include Russian armored vehicles, US satellites, and Chinese surveillance cameras to protect the hazardous cargo. A Norwegian frigate is ready to go to the Syrian port of Latakia to collect the weapons for destruction. The chemical watchdog said it was up to Syria to mitigate the risks involved in transporting the stockpile to the port. Syria agreed to abandon its chemical arsenal to avert a possible international military intervention after a sarin North gas attack in August 2013.
Under the agreement, which was brokered by the United States and Russia, the complete elimination of Syria's all chemical weapons material and equipment must be completed by the first half of next year. Now, the most critical chemicals include about 20 tons of the blister agent sulfur mustard. China is easing its birth planning policy. Now it's enough for only one of the parents to be an only child, the couple to have a second child. This is the first major easing of the 3-decades-old restriction, first announced by the ruling Communist Party's leadership. The decision has now been officially sanctioned by the Standing Committee of China's top legislature and also the National People's Congress, according to the Chinese official news agency.
Implemented around 1980, China's one-child policy allowed couples to have a second child only if neither parent had siblings or if the first child was by the overall family. The policy is believed to have prevented some 400 million births. It has been praised as a means of reducing China's rapidly growing population. However, critics insist that the policy is a violation of human rights and results in forced abortions and heavy fines for the Chinese families. Some critics also say the law hurts China's elderly, who typically rely on their children for support, and even constrains economic growth as the working-age population begins to decline. Since the 1990s, the birth rate in the country has gone down, with Chinese women giving birth to an average of 1.4 to 1.6 children. Demographers and policymakers have estimated that the new easing would result in 1 to 2 million extra births per year in the first few years, on top of the 16 million babies born annually in China. China is the world's most populous country, with 1.35 billion people.
The easing of the one-child policy expected to go into effect in some regions of China in the first quarter of next year. Moving on now, well, this year is coming to a close and it's time to take stock. From a media point of view, it's been a rather rough year. The greatest reporting coup of the year, the revelation is based on the leaks of former NSA contractor Snowden, fell to Glenn Greenwald, a long-time media outsider. That's as veteran institutions in the United States have been coming under fire for erroneous breaking news reports, for example, during the break of the Boston Marathon bombing. Well, Radio VR's Justin Mitchell was joined live by Robert McChesney, a professional, professor of communications at the University of Illinois, and also co-author of the book Dollarocracy, to discuss the crisis in modern journalism.
Well, there's a lot of things we've already talked about, like Bezos' connection with the CIA, or Amazon's connection with the CIA, and sort of the power this gives extraordinarily wealthy individuals and corporations over leading news media. But I think really the biggest story of all, the one that's talked about the very least, which is that Bezos was able to purchase the Post really for chump change. He reached into his spare change drawer and pulled out, $250 million in cash to buy the Post, which had he tried to buy it, for example, 10 or 15 years ago, probably would have had to spend more in the range of 3 or 4 to as high as $6 billion to buy. So basically he got it at a fire sale price. And no one was surprised by that who follows news media, who follows the business of commercial journalism, because the business of commercial journalism is dying rapidly. It's in free-fall collapse.
What do they need to know that newsrooms are being decimated? So where does that leave us?
Well, first of all, they should know the extent of it, because while it's obvious, when you look at it closely, and journalists know this, that there's very few reporters left covering anything. What it means is that most of the news people are getting from the news media is either unedited, unreported official statements by people in power, or else it's just press releases and public relations stuff. And powerful just are able to purchase what they want to have as the news, and it goes in an unadulterated fashion. All the research shows that, news now, what we consider news, well over half of it, in some cases as high as 80 or 90% of it, is basically stuff that has nothing to do with journalism. It's just press releases or uncritically reporting people in power, official sources, what they say. And, I don't think many Americans are aware of this because it's not reported, it's not talked about. And to most Americans, they think they're in this information blizzard, that they're overwhelmed by news and information. They don't understand that most of it's just nonsense propaganda or regurgitating some talking point that a PR agency has thrown out there.
Do you have any ideas for how journalism can dig itself out of this existential crisis?
Oh, absolutely. We just have to look at all the other major democracies in the world, from Japan and Asia to virtually every Western and Northern European country. They have massive spending for public and community media. It's non-commercial. And what we find, that all the research shows, those nations, which are all democracies, the nations that spend the most per capita on public and community media, supporting radio, TV, and now internet, have more diverse and competitive media systems than the United States has. They have much higher voter turnout, and by The Economist magazine, they're much freer and more democratic societies. The research shows that the more that is spent by democracies to provide nonprofit, non-commercial journalism, the better the commercial journalism gets too. The less censorship there is, and the more adversarial the news media are toward the government and power. Quite the contrary of the fiction that's proposed in the United States whenever the issue arises.
100 million people worldwide listen to the Voice of Russia for a Russian perspective. The Voice of Russia broadcasts in 160 countries and 38 languages. Now you can join them. News, views, and discussion. Current topics, real people. We welcome your feedback and suggestions at blog@ruvr.ru.
Radio VR News.
A suicide bomber set off a blast in the entrance hall of a Russian train station on Sunday, investigators said, killing at least 16. Authorities said the attacker detonated a shrapnel-filled bomb in front of a metal detector just inside the main entrance of the station in Volgograd. The Federal Investigative Committee and other officials initially thought the suicide bomber had blown herself up after a police officer started to approach her near the metal detector because she looked suspicious. Authorities identified her as a resident of Dagestan, the widow of 2 militants killed by Russian security forces. Investigative Committee spokesman Vladimir Markin later said a man could have set off the blast, Russian news agencies reported. The State Department on Sunday condemned the attack of the suicide bomber at the main railway station in the southern Russian city of Volgograd. The United States condemned the attack in the strongest terms, a statement issued by a State Department spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, said. At least 18 people killed in attacks across Iraq on Sunday, including a military general in a bombing in the northern city of Mosul. The suicide bomber killed at least 8 soldiers, including a brigadier general and 3 officers, when he blew himself up by their convoy in the eastern part of Mosul. Egypt's interim president said on Sunday the government was committed to holding parliamentary and presidential elections within 6 months of approval of the new constitution, to be voted on next month. France will supply weapons to the Lebanese army if it is asked to do so, French President François Hollande said on Sunday during a visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met with King Abdullah. And retired Formula One legend Michael Schumacher underwent emergency surgery after being admitted in a coma with a cranial trauma after a ski accident in Meribel, a French hospital said on Sunday night. The news in brief.
Russian Book World.
I'm Konstantin Bolic, and I will be guiding you in the world of recent and perhaps not so recent books from and about Russia. Hello and welcome to a New Year edition of Russian Book World. For most Russians, New Year's Eve is their favorite holiday. It lasts way beyond midnight and is usually a cozy family affair around a festive table. It also opens up a week or 2 of winter holidays, so there's a lot to look forward to. Exactly a year ago, we devoted a program to a legendary Soviet cookbook called Book of Tasty and Healthy Food that was first published in 1939 and sold over 8 million copies. And today we continue exploring books on Russian and Soviet food with a bit of a historical twist. Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking, a memoir of food and longing by Anya von Bremzen, was published earlier this year by Doubleday, and instantly attracted a lot of praise in the UK and the US. One of the former guests on Russian Book World, British novelist A.D. Miller, called the book funny, angry, ingenious, and moving. Anya von Bremzen's book falls into an intriguing and fast-evolving new genre that combines autobiography and food writing. Some critics have labeled it food noir. These days, Anya von Bremzen is a New York-based award-winning food writer and journalist. But back in 1974, she and her mother Larissa arrived in America as stateless refugees, with, as she writes in her memoir, no warm coats. What they had, though, was a deep appreciation of food, which, as they soon discovered, lost its meaning without the context of their real home. Even though the Soviet food was often rather Spartan or difficult to obtain, let us hear a short passage from the prologue to Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking, called Poisoned Madeleines.
All happy food memories are alike. All unhappy food memories are unhappy after their own fashion. Mom and I both grew up within a triumphalist, scarlet-blazed fairy tale of socialist abundance and glorious harvests. Our experiences, though, featured no happy kitchens enveloped in an idyllic haze of vanilla, no kindly matriarchs setting golden holiday roasts on the table. Tea cakes rich in bourgeois butter? I do have such a memory. It's of Mom reading Proust aloud in our Croissant slum. Me utterly bored by the Frenchman's sensory reveries, but besotted with the idea of the real edible cookie. What did it taste like, that exotic capitalist Madeleine? I desperately wanted to know. Inevitably, a story about Soviet food is a chronicle of longing, of unrequited desire. So what happens when some of your most intense culinary memories involve foods you hadn't actually tasted? Memories of imaginings, of received histories, feverish collective yearning produced by 70 years of geopolitical isolation and scarcity.
Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking is not a gloomy read, however. Celebrated American travel writer Ian Fraser, who in fact also appeared on Russian Book World, praised the book as the funniest and truest book I've read about Russia in years. This past September, I attended the book's launch at Pushkin House in London, where Anya von Bremzen spoke about her memoir. The evening was hosted by A.D. Miller, and he started by asking the author what prompted her to write a rather unusual book in comparison with her previous books in journalism.
This is very different from the work I've done before.
which was in itself kind of a fluke because I wanted to be a concert pianist. I graduated from the Juilliard School, I kind of lived and breathed piano, and then I had a professional injury, and I started looking for something else to do, and I thought, why don't I write a cooking book? And with my ex-boyfriend and I, we spent 2 years traveling around the former Soviet Union collecting recipes. And the book came out in 1990. I went on to write more cookery books and to become a contributing editor at a number of glossy magazines. And I wrote about all this high-end cuisine, chefs like Ferran Adria, and going to all these restaurants for work, very different life, eating foie gras and truffles. But in the back of my mind, there was this other kind of darker, much more existential relationship to food, which I didn't quite exercise. And as I write in this book, in the introduction, I felt like I was living in two parallel lives professionally. One was, you eat foie gras for breakfast. On the other way, every time I saw a banana, something in me would stir, and remind me of the days when bananas we ate, once a year. So it was kind of this everything had a double flavor to it. I could never quite reconcile with, the kind of abundance of my professional life and how often hungry, semi-hungry kind of state where food was fetishized. So, this memoir in a way was, as many personal projects are, was a way of making myself whole again.
Then Anya von Bremsen spoke about what gave her book shape and structure.
So I was wondering, what can I do with it, with food in Russia, that resonate in a much larger way? And it was my mother who said, why don't you structure the book as a kind of metaphoric meal, almost, that spans the entire decade of the Soviet experience? And I thought, yes, this is what it should be, 10 decades from 1910 to, which is present, chapter structured, 1910, 1920, and 1930s. Something that mixes, social history, family memoir, with food at its center, and a present-day cooking chronicle. This is how this kind of very complicated family memoir came about. It's, part family memoir, part social history. If you really can't understand the personal outside the political context of my idea. And part cooking chronicle of me and my mom cooking and talking our way through this experience.
Russian Book World.
You're listening to Russian Book World, and today we're talking about Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking, a memoir of food and longing by Anya von Bremsen. It was published earlier this year by Doubleday. We have just heard the author speaking at Pushkin House in London this past September. On her visit to the UK, Anya von Bremsen also visited the VR London studios, where she met with our London correspondent Alice Lanyardo. Let us now listen to the highlights of their interview.
You talk in your book about cooking not only during Soviet times, but before that, about golden pies, about kulibyaka, fish pie that was made in Gogol's time. You talk about food in Russian literature. I think there were about 86 mentions of food in his novel Dead Souls. A very appetizing book to read. Do you think that Western readers are familiar with that kind of pre-revolutionary food, or do you think it's still a discovery that's yet to be made?
I think classic Russian cuisine is more familiar certainly than Soviet cuisine. And the way the book is organized, it goes decade by decade of the Soviet century. So it starts in the 1910s with the kind of farewell to the decadent cuisine of the Tsars, with a farewell, to those glorious golden pies, kulibyakas of Russian literature. And then in 1917, it all comes crashing down. And that kind of decadent, abundant, lavish cuisine obviously disappears. And then it sort of comes back after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I think Russian cuisine and culture, and certainly Soviet cuisine and culture, is still a bit of a mystery to the Western reader.
Perhaps then we should explain to our listeners what a kulibyaka is.
Kulibyaka is a traditional Russian pie that's oblong, usually rectangular, and the classic one from the end of 19th century, and it's filled with different layers of fish, rice, and mushrooms. So it's very tall and layered. And for my book, Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking, my mother and I actually recreated the classic Russian kulebaka. It was a humongous effort.
How long did it take you?
About 2 days, because you have to make the yeast pastry and it has to rise, and you have to make the yeast blini and they have to rise. So in the end of the book, because the book also contains a chapter of recipes, one for each of the chapters, in the end I ended up giving a more simplified version for the readers, because we went through a lot of effort.
Did you have a kind of feeling that you are back in the 19th century eating this grand creation?
Yes, very much so. And we also had the feeling of that we had back in the Soviet days when we read about classical Russian cuisine in Chekhov, in Gogol, in Tolstoy, because they devote some of the most sumptuous pages to food. And we kind of knew it. We knew the cuisine, but we've never tasted anything like this. Because in Soviet days, of course, the ingredients were not available. So what we ate, for instance, the kulebaka that you could get in a Soviet shop, was just a rectangle of dough with a barely there kind of little layer of cabbage filling. So it was nothing like what we read about. So we read Chekhov, for instance, and we just imagined, we tried to fill in the flavors, we just imagined what it would taste like. In the book, the subtitle of the book is A Memoir of Food and Longing. And longing for food, dreaming about food, fantasizing about foods, both Russian and foreign, that we never got to taste, was very much a part of the experience. And that's what made it so intense. I remember tasting a banana maybe once a year. I'll never forget the first time I tasted a banana. It was like just some explosion of some tropical, I don't know what, from another reality. It was just rapturous. And I would just go on dreaming and dreaming about having a banana again. And you just don't have that intense kind of fantasies about food here where you can taste everything.
One of the things that's very noticeable in the book, and that was obviously noticeable to you as well writing it, is the contrast between that luxurious, rich 19th century food and Soviet food. And yet some Soviet food you're very fond of, aren't you?
The kind of a theme of this book is this idea of a poisoned Madeleine, Proust Madeleine, which was very idealized. And, our foods were not always delicious. Sometimes they were spoiled. And yet, because of the intensity of the feelings that you had for the food, they were very powerful, and still remain very powerful memory triggers and they were rich experiences. I also enjoy the actual flavors.
Are there things you pine for today that you can't get anymore?
In this globalized world, you really can get anything anywhere. It's more like the way that things were produced. For instance, people in Moscow, they would eat the sosiski, frankfurters, sausages, or the ice cream. And they would say, oh, well, it's not made like this anymore. Obviously, 30, 40 years ago, even if you can get the same item, it might have tasted differently. Or it's the nostalgia that you infuse it with. It's hard to separate one from the other. But Russian food has a particular savor. It's a very wintry cuisine. So for any Russians who drink, of course you have to have herring. You have to have smoked fish. You have to have dark breads. There's certain items that you just can't do without.
And how much was your cooking Russian food or Soviet food when you emigrated to the United States about missing home?
My mother and I are very different. My mother was very anti-Soviet. She knew why she left. She really wanted to be in the West. She saw the Soviet Union as a prison to her. I was much more at home in my own country. So I myself really missed home. Well, my mom really wanted to experiment with all the American foodstuffs. So she did these disastrous things. She would try to make Russian dishes like salad olivier, which is a Russian potato salad with pickles. She would just grab all these things off supermarket shelves. She made a salad with pickled pork feet from American South that I just remember was appalling. And the American mayonnaise didn't taste anything like Russian Provençal mayonnaise. And then you kind of settle into it, and you know how much of your own food you want to cook and how much, you know, you want to adapt to the new reality.
And that was Anya von Benson talking about her memoir, Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking, talking to our London correspondent Alice Laniado. The book was published by Doubleday. The program was presented by Konstantin Bulic. Literary consultant for the program was Helena Rubinova. Special thanks to our London correspondent Alice Laniado, and I'm wishing you a very happy new year.
Few countries have more negative myths associated with them than Russia. There are old myths about Russia being inherently authoritarian. There are new myths about Russia helping dictators or suppressing homosexuals. You can fight myths the real way, by finding gay bars in Moscow, or by fishing out facts about Russia's foreign policy in biased Western media. Or you can do it the easy way, by tuning into the program Myths About Russia with Radio VR's political analyst, Dmitry Babich.
Myths about Russia. Are there many political prisoners in Russia? The year 2013 will be remembered for a series of amnesties and pardons, which happened in autumn and December and led to the release of several well-publicized inmates of Russian prisons. Mikhail Khodorkovsky and the two remaining members of the Pussy Riot group were released from jail. The court case against 30 members of the Greenpeace-owned vessel Arctic Sunrise was also dropped. So, the 26 foreigners who were on board of the Arctic Sunrise and whom the international press expected to spend 15 years in Russian jail actually spent just about 2 months there. The most disappointing development for the foreign journalists was the fact that Khodorkovsky did not become a symbolic head of the Russian liberal opposition, and the members of Pussy Riot were not met by enthusiastic crowds in Moscow. Putin, seemingly unchanged, stayed cool in the Kremlin. The French daily Le Figaro even wrote that the whole operation with the amnesty was a shrewd manipulation by Putin, who presumably, I quote, deprived the liberal opposition of its most visible talking heads. Strange logic. How can Putin make the opposition weaker by letting out of prison the very heads which the opposition was so keen to see talking? And these speakers can't complain of not having access to the media. Khodorkovsky's first press conference in Germany was attended by hundreds of journalists, and it was broadcast live by 2 Moscow-based television channels. The 2 members of the Pussy Riot also spoke to dozens of radio stations. They were interviewed by many newspapers and other media with a substantial Russian audience. Obviously, the release from prison deprived these talking heads of the remnants of the aura of forbidden fruit, which had never been too tempting for Russians, even during their stay in jail. In fact, even in jail, all of these people continued to give interviews. Interviews were given to the Moscow-based newspapers like Kommersant or Vedomosti, as well as to foreign publications like the New York Times. And Mikhail Khodorkovsky even managed to write books in jail. The secret of the West's deceived expectations can be explained rather trivially. While posing as political figures, all of these inmates had some substantial non-political reasons to be put in jail. The head of the International Committee in the Duma, the Russian parliament, Alexei Pushkov, has the following explanation for the lack of enthusiasm for these kind of cases in the broad Russian public.
I know that from the English point of view, the fate of Mr. Khodorkovsky raises question, and the sentence on Pussy Riot raises question, but in England it is seen as a kind of political persecution, but Russians don't know about political persecution. They know that there were a group of girls who have come to the main Orthodox cathedral in Moscow, where the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church is serving, and there they have put some kind of Ku Klux Klan heads on their hand, and they have staged some kind of satanistic performance. And that's what it's all about in Russia. It's about attacking and offending religious feelings. And that's why people were calling to put them in jail for 5 years, for 4 years. And if you take the position of a part of the Russian public opinion, the court sentence was extremely mild, I would say.
Recently, on a live program at the BBC World Service, the former British ambassador to Russia, Tony Brandon, refused to agree with the presenter when she said that there were, I quote, many political prisoners in Russia. In fact, there are people who are being punished for certain actions connected to their political beliefs, such as throwing rocks at police in the fight near the Kremlin in May 2012. But the situation is not much different in many countries. In the UK, for that matter, 2013 was the year when Trenton Oldfield, an Australian national who staged his political protest by swimming in the River Thames, was kicked out of the country. Before leaving the UK, Oldfield had to spend 6 months in British jail for being, I quote, a public nuisance. In his interview to the Voice of Russia, Mr. Oldfield explained his action as a protest against the elitism which the boat race between Cambridge and Oxford on the River Thames came to symbolize. He compared his plight to that of the Pussy Riot members.
Considering how much the British media got behind Pussy Riot, that's probably the one thing that I was fascinated by, with the difference in how they responded to me, that they, really confronted some significant issues, and they were, sent to prison like I was for their political activities. But then something in the culture here forces people to behave differently when it's their own situation, their own politics.
So, if Trenton Oldfield spent 6 months in jail for swimming in the River Thames, isn't it fair that the Pussy Riot members spent a little more than a year behind bars for dancing in the altar of Russia's most sacred church? They spent their time in prison also for calling that church's patriarch a bitch and an excrement of God. And they were also filming all of this on video. In the case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the about-face which the Western press made about his person in 2003 was stunning. Until Khodorkovsky's quarrel with Putin that year, Khodorkovsky was described by the American press as, I quote, a robber baron. The German magazine Der Spiegel called him a fortune seeker with blank spaces in his memory when the rights of the minority shareholders in his companies were concerned. There was a lot of investigative stories in the Western media about the way Khodorkovsky avoided paying not only taxes for the Russian state, but also debts to his foreign creditors in the United States. All of these investigations ended abruptly in 2003, when Khodorkovsky was suddenly elevated to the status of, I quote the press, an oligarchic Nelson Mandela, the conscience of Russian nation, and a lot of other pathetic names. Yes, Mr. Khodorkovsky can be respected for staying for 10 years in jail without asking for pardon. Yes, he is a strong man, but he is certainly not a hero, and the people from his company who ended up in prison are not political prisoners. They are not political prisoners simply because they never made political statements in all their lives. They just helped Mr. Khodorkovsky to become the richest person in the Russia of the 1990s. That was not the most honest and not the most humane time for rich people in Russian history.
What made the news in 2013? The events that moved us, shocked us, and gave us hope. Join Radio VR's Dasha Chernyshova on a journey through the year that is about to end.
What will be President Obama's legacy after he leaves the Oval Office? The Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, that brought the first Afro-American to the presidential office and caused one of the longest government shutdowns in the American history, is likely to become the signature legislation of Obama's presidency. And the Republicans want to deny him this legacy at almost all costs. Both houses of Congress passed the Obamacare, and the Supreme Court gave it a clean bill of health. And with the Republicans still attempting to derail Obamacare and turn it into a political football, it remains unclear whether he's strong enough to get legislation passed. Jeffrey Feldman is the editor-in-chief of the influential political blog Screenshot.
The legacy of Obamacare policy is uncertain at this stage. Frankly, it will be decades before the dust settles and before we know whether or not Obamacare resulted in across-the-board lowering of expenses. It's going to be used as a political football for a long time to come. Elections is going to be a political football.
This year, Obamacare turned from words to actions. At October 1st was the first day people could sign up. At the core of Obamacare lies an attempt to provide all Americans with health care. When George W. Bush left office, 40% did not have health insurance, and the inability to cover medication costs is the number one reason behind personal bankruptcy in the U.S. However, skeptics say the ACA will negatively influence the U.S. economy, and Obamacare's cost is estimated at up total $1.36 trillion by 2023. John Davison is healthcare policy analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
We're opposed to the Affordable Care Act for many reasons, but primarily because of the unintended consequences the act is going to have on the U.S. economy, on employees alike, by driving up the cost of health insurance and making health insurance more affordable for the middle class. We're also opposed to it for the way it tries to programs like Medicaid, which are ineffective, wasteful, and provide a very poor quality of care for the people on them.
As the healthcare.gov website was launched, it was crippled by a computer program glitch, giving its opponents, especially Republicans, room to maneuver. They now say it foreshadows deeper failings. The president, however, calls to stop worrying about the website and start talking about Obamacare's benefits.
There is no doubt trade among nations makes the world a lot better off. But global trade doesn't stand. It's been playing an ever-vital role from the time Adam Smith set the basics of free trade. Radio VR will be taking a look into Russia's top 20 biggest trading partners across the world. The United Arab Emirates is a serious and promising partner for Russia in the Gulf region, with the two having outstanding ties of friendship and common interests. But experts say both countries have huge potential for growth in trade and economic relations.
In 2012, trade turnover between Russia and United Arab Emirates was $1.5 billion. In the first 6 months of 2013, trade increased by 7.5% and topped almost $900 million. Last year, United Arab Emirates invested $82 million for the Russian economy, while Russia invested $67 million. All in all, the United Arab Emirates invested around $2.4 billion in Russia.
After the recent visit by Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi to Moscow and his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the international investment is set to grow more than twofold. Abu Dhabi will invest up to $5 billion in Russian infrastructure projects under an investment partnership and in Russia's capital this fall. The Emirates Finance Department will co-invest in the joint venture together with its state-run Russian Direct Investment Fund, or RDIF. The big announcement came months after the RDIF set up a $2 billion fund with Abu Dhabi-based development after letting Russia acquire industrial sectors. The development of air travel between the two countries is one of the easiest ways to increase investment and trade between Russia and the United Arab Emirates. Among other areas of cooperation are the energy sector, construction, transportation, and telecommunications. In 2011, Stortrans Gas ended the construction of the 250-kilometer-long gas pipeline. Currently, almost 40 branches of Russian companies and over 350 joint ventures operate in the country. Such key Russian companies as Lukoil, Rosneft, Volga-Dnipro, Amtel, Stortrans Gas, Interexim Holding, Alrosa Metal Invest Holding, B2B Capital, and Interval US work in the Arabic country.
Please take your seat and fasten your seatbelt. Also, make sure it's in full upright position. Wherever you fly, you're always welcome in Russia, a country of ancient history, picturesque landscapes, various architecture, and worldwide known culture. Let's take a look at some of the most exciting places. This is Travel Russia.
The Russian city of Voronezh, located near the Ukrainian border and 500 kilometers southwest of Moscow, might market itself as a nice getaway in Russia. Its center, packed with cozy restaurants and cafes, resembles a small European city. But from being ranked a historical city of Russia, it has also been named a city of military glory. It has been rebuilt many times over the centuries and underwent a complete reconstruction after World War II. It also proudly calls itself the birthplace of the Soviet Union's first video cassette recorder, produced in 1984 as a carbon copy of the Japanese-made Panasonic. Trains to Voronezh, which lies about 500 kilometers south of Moscow, run through the
Sovietsky station. It's up to 13 hours on average. Over less than 8 hours. Tickets start at 11. You can also catch a bus to Voronezh near Moscow Paveletsky train station. There are daily flights to Voronezh from Moscow's Vnukovo and Domodedovo airports. Tickets for the 1-hour flight start at about $100 round trip.
1585.
Voronezh is founded as a fortress on the banks of the Voronezh River. It was meant to defend Moscow's kingdom from the Tatars. However, 5 years later, the original city is fully destroyed after being attacked by Ukrainian Cossacks. Voronezh gradually evolves into a sizable town. Tsar Peter the Great built a dockyard here for the construction of the Sea of Azov flotilla. This fleet, the first ever built in Russia, included the first Russian ship of the line called Proto Predestinatia. By the 18th century, Voronezh grows into the largest city of South Russia and the economic center of the large and fertile region.
The 19th century.
The city is the nucleus of Russia's central Black Earth region. Its key industries are agriculture and the manufacturing industry.
World War II.
Voronezh is the scene of fierce fighting between Russia and combined Axis troops. The city serves as a staging area for the attack on Stalingrad for the German forces. During the war, the city is almost completely ruined, with 92% of all buildings destroyed.
The 1950s.
Voronezh is rebuilt with most buildings and historical monuments repaired. New factories established.
The 1990s.
The city suffers from high unemployment rates. It becomes part of the communist voting region known as Russia's Red Belt. Today, Voronezh is the economic, industrial, cultural and scientific center of the central Black Earth region. It still has several Soviet-era enterprises. Among them is the aviation company famous for having produced the Tu-144, the global classic of the legendary Concorde supersonic jet. Voronezh is the birthplace of the world-known Russian novelists Ivan Bunin and Andrei Platonov. Ivan Bunin was the first Russian writer to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. He often mentioned the town where he spent the first 3 years of his life in his books, though admitted that he hardly remembered it. Andrei Platonov, a Soviet writer whose works were nevertheless banned in his own lifetime, was born in Yemskaya Sloboda on the outskirts of Voronezh.
There were wicker fences, gardens and commons along Yemskaya Sloboda where I was born, Platonov writes, describing his childhood. Not houses but huts, and many peasants on the Zadonskaya highway.
Andrei Platonov often referred in his books to familiar places in Voronezh. Researchers have retraced exactly the travels of his heroes through the Voronezh region.
Dog lover.
Gavril Tripolsky, a Soviet writer best known for his novel White Beam, Black Ear, was born in Voronezh and spent his whole life here. The international award-winning book was made into a movie 6 years later after it was written, and was even close to winning an Oscar. It tells the story of a white setter with a black ear that becomes homeless because of its owner's illness and goes off on a globe-trotting in search of his master. There is a sculpture in its honor of a lonely dog in front of the Voronezh Shop Puppet Theater.
A secret agent.
Alexander Litvinenko, an officer of the Russian Secret Service who died in London 7 years ago and became known worldwide, was born in Voronezh. The Voronezh History Museum is placed in a former guest palace for important traveling royalty when they were in town. The Voronezh Ballet and Opera Theatre is known across Russia. It was founded in 1802, and since then there have been hundreds of Russian stars of the stage that have performed there. The newly built Annunciation Cathedral is the third largest Orthodox church in Russia and one of the tallest Orthodox churches in the world. The Voronezh Regional Literature Museum is located right in the heart of the city's historical center. It is named after a famous Russian poet, Ivan Nikitin, who lived here. The main exhibits are dedicated to the poet and his life, and also to Ivan Bunin. You can also stop by the house where Ivan Bunin was born. The model of the ship Mercury is an interesting naval monument in the city. The Mercury was one of the ships built in the Voronezh shipyard during the reign of Peter the Great. A plaque of granite marks the place where the first military paratrooper drop in the Soviet Union took place. The date of this event is considered to be August 2nd, 1939. For the first time in the Soviet Union, a full military parachute landing took place. Another local landmark worth seeing is a monument of a kitten sitting next to a crow on a tree near a McDonald's restaurant. Both characters are from a Soviet cartoon that takes place in Voronezh.
Bored of living in the city, the kitten asks a crow to help it travel to Africa. However, the kitten finds the continent unfriendly and asks to be brought back. Start from the city's main revolution. The South building from Paris, Russia, and currently side by side with modern architecture such as the Voronezh Puppet Theatre. It looks like a monument in its own right with puppet characters on top of its columns. Drop in at the Krumskoye's Voronezh Regional Art Museum, located inside a historic mansion. Its collection of items of Russian and European art from the 18th to the 20th century, an artifact and a collection of Russian items. Stop by Большая Dvoryanskaya Street to admire the modest boarding house where Ivan Bunin, a Russian classic novelist and a Nobel Prize winner, was born. Don't miss the 18th century German Mary Magdalene Lutheran Church, built during the time of Catherine the Great. The elegant blue building was a place of worship for German expatriates living in the Voronezh area and worked for the local supply. During Soviet times, the building was occupied by an electricity company. The Petrovsky Passage on 20 Let Velky Sam Street is the city's most prestigious hotel. Its downtown entrance is graced by Peter the Great statue. Famous politician Irina Hakimova used the hotel to present her book in 2011. The Azimut Hotel on Plehanovskaya Street is another prestigious address located in the city center. Part of a Russian hotel chain, the Soviet-era building has undergone a complete refurbishment of its interiors. The Kirovsky restaurant on Chira Street is located close to the original Parliament building. It offers a cozy, homely atmosphere in which you can sample a selection of Russian and European dishes. The Palmer Italian restaurant on Patriotic Avenue is a prestigious place considered one of the city's best. It's known for its fish dishes and mutton. 4 reasons to go to Voronezh. First, to visit Scarlet Sails, the only park in Russia that meets European standards. It's known for its collection of roses brought over in 2011 by the French gardener Philippe Mangy. He said the park reminded him of France. Second, to visit Roman castle that used to belong to Princess Oldenburgskaya. It still stands in a town called Roman, about 40 kilometers away from Voronezh. It's one of the best examples of a 19th century castle. Third, to meet an experienced trainer to give you a ride on a horse at the Ruskaya Usada hippodrome. And finally, to see the world-famous Kostyanki, a Paleolithic site known for its high concentration of human and mammoth remains. The site was discovered during the construction of Peter the Great's naval fleet. A box of Voronezh sweets is a tasty souvenir you can bring to your friends and relatives from the city. The box has pretty pictures of the city sights on it, and local residents claim that the fructose sweets containing no sugar are very original and nice. Stand by to keep exploring Russia's southwest. The next destination might be Lipetsk, Oryol, Kursk, or Belgorod. Choose any and enjoy your trip.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Russia. On behalf of Radio Voice of Russia, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Have a nice day.
Radio VR. Washington, D.C. on 103.5 FM, HD2, and 1390
Moscow headquarters. Radio VR, the voice of Russia. Radio VR,
At least 15 people were killed on Sunday by a suicide bomber who blew herself up at the main railway station in the southern city of Volgograd, Russian emergency service said. Vladimir Markin, a prosecution spokesman, said initial inquiries indicated a woman had blown herself up near the entrance to the station. The bomb was packed with nails and shrapnel. News reports said at least 30 people suffered injuries. The provisional death toll of 15 did not... Russian...
Así lo informó el portavoz oficial del Comité de Instrucción de Rusia, Vladimir Markin, en tanto que puntualizó que 40 heridos siguen hospitalizados. 3 de ellos pueden ser transportados a Moscú. Entre los muertos hay un policía, aquel que intentó detener a la terrorista. Otros 6 policías y una niña de 9 años resultaron heridos de gravedad. En total hay 15 víctimas en estado grave, la mayoría de ellas con lesiones craneales y heridas de extremidades. La vida de 9 pacientes está en peligro, informó el gobernador de la región de Volgogrado, Sergei Bajenov.